Hey everyone, welcome back to Love Wins, where the truth matters because it's the truth that sets us free. I've been asked to share with you, so I'm going to do it. I'll try and remember to do it more often, but I forget most of the time. I do have a radio program, and you can find past episodes of that radio program on the internet at freshangle.ca. It's a series that goes through the scriptures from Genesis, and we're going to work our way all the way to Revelation, looking at the women of the Bible. People often think that the Bible is patriarchal, and it is culturally. The people of the Bible are patriarchal. But when you actually stop and look at the stories and the women in them, you find that God is very much not that way. And it's quite illuminating and makes God look much better than sometimes people say he is. All right, let's get into this video. We are going to be looking at John chapter 9. We're going to be looking at an instance of conflict between Jesus and the church leaders and how they handled it. And we're going to try and apply the principles that we learned there to our world today. So John chapter 9 is where we're at, and I'm just going to read you the story first, and then we'll go from there. Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. His disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, by referring to him as rabbi, they're looking for a teaching and an understanding. They're talking to him as a teacher. That's what rabbi means. And they want to have an answer. Jesus answered and said, Neither this man nor his parents sinned. You gave me only two options. I'm telling you it's neither one. But that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and he made clay with saliva. He anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed, and he came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors, and those who had previously seen that he was blind, said, Is not this he who sat and begged? Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. He said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, How were your eyes opened? He answered and said, A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes, and said to me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received my sight. Then they said to him, Where is he? And he said, I don't know. They brought him, who formerly was blind, to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also asked him again, Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. And he said to them, He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, How can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. They said to the blind man again, What do you say about him because he opened your eyes? He said, He is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered and said, We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees we do not know, or who opened his eyes we do not know. He is of age, ask him. He will speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, He is of age, ask him. So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered and said to them, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know is that I was blind, and now I see." Then they said to him again, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered and said to them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to be his disciples?" Then they reviled him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from." The man answered and said to him, "Why, this is a marvelous thing, that you do not know where he is from, yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered and said to him, "You were completely born in sins, and are you teaching us?" And they threw him out. That story has many layers and many lessons that can be learned from it. First of all, his own disciples asked him, "Teacher, whose fault is it that he was born blind, him or his parents?" Within the question, there is an admitted theology. There is an admitted worldview. Our worldview is that if you have something wrong with you, it's a punishment from God, and that punishment is due to you because of something you did, or perhaps something that your family did. But there's something wrong. And Jesus cut through that and he said, "No, it's not one or the other. You gave me two options. I'm not choosing either one because neither one is true." If you get nothing else from this video, if you are still here but you're about to leave, get this. When someone presents to you only two options, run away. It is so rare that there are only two options. When people say there's an A and there's a B, the answer could be C or D or E or F or G. Jesus said no. It's not one of those two options. Way back in the Old Testament, when Joshua was about to lead the people into Jericho, their first encounter with the enemy, he went by himself to pray, and this being appeared to him. Looked like this giant warlike person with a sword. And Joshua was understandably afraid, and he said, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" And the person answered, "No." And if you carefully read through the context of that person that was facing him was Jesus. Jesus is not for you or your enemies. He's for you and your enemies. It's not A or B, it's C. So the disciples and Jesus encounter this man who was born blind, and they have this theology that it must have been his fault somehow, or his parents' fault because he was born blind. So how do you sin within the womb? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So maybe his parents did something while he was in the womb that affected him, and then he was born blind. No. And then Jesus says it was done so that God could be revealed in his life. And then as the story unfolds, God is very much revealed in his life because Jesus puts clay on his eyes, tells him to go to this pool and wash, and he comes away seeing. So even though he started life from the womb blind, now he is a celebrity because he says this is the first time in history that anyone has been given back their sight. And that's actually true. If you go into the Old Testament, you will find all kinds of miracles. You will even find people coming back from the dead. But you will not find any healings of blindness in the Old Testament. Jesus was the first person to heal blindness because Jesus was making a point by healing blindness. I'm the only one who can help you truly see. As the story unfolds, people begin to say, well, this this is the guy who was blind, but now he can see. And other people were like, well, no, it can't be that guy. I mean, it looks like him and it sounds like him and he walks like him, but it can't be him because that's not possible. And it said a division arose among them. When we encounter things we don't fully understand, divisions arise among us. I don't need to say any more than COVID to prove the point that when something comes up that we don't fully understand, that we've never faced before, divisions arise among us. But the story's not over. Because they're confused and because they don't know what to do with this whole scenario, they bring him to the Pharisees, the leaders of the church. Maybe they can solve this. And the leaders of the church, well, they're incensed right off the bat because whoever did this for this guy did it on Sabbath. He made clay on Sabbath. He worked on Sabbath. He healed on Sabbath. You don't do that. Not if you're a good Jew. The story keeps on going. You see what's coming? Jesus and the Pharisees are about to collide, but we didn't read that far. In this story, the Pharisees collide with the man who was healed, and they ask him what happened. So he explains it. And they say, well, this cannot be. We're not getting answers we want from this guy. Where are his parents? So the parents are brought in. And the parents, you can tell, are reluctant. They're willing to admit what they know they can't not admit, and they go no further. Yes, we are his parents. Yes, he was born blind. That's all we know. The fact he can see, how he can see, we don't know any of that. We don't want to get involved in that. He's old enough to answer for himself. You can ask him. They've already asked him. They've already concluded that whoever did this can't be from God because he did it on Sabbath, and Sabbath breakers aren't from God. It's easy to judge people when we create the measuring stick ourselves, and then if they don't measure up to our measuring stick, then they're out. And that's essentially what Judaism at that time was. We've already decided what God is like, and we've already decided what the Messiah is going to be like, and we've already decided how Sabbath works, and we've already decided how this works and that works, and if you don't fit inside this and that and the other, you're out. So they bring the son back in. And the son's like, I've already told you the story. Do I need to tell you again? If I tell you again, is it because you want to be his disciples and they're getting upset? So this guy can't be from God. If he's from God, he wouldn't do these things. And then this boy says, the young man says, well, if he wasn't from God, how could he do these things? It's a quandary. It's a mess. Things are messy when we're moving from a place where we think we know everything to encountering a situation that shakes what we think we know. And then we have to decide, am I going to stay in what I am sure of and ignore this or get rid of it? Or am I going to dare to consider that maybe I don't know everything? Now, there was a point between the parents leaving and the son coming back in where it says that the Jews had already determined that if anyone followed Jesus, listened to Jesus, had anything to do with Jesus, they were going to get booted out of the synagogue. And that's the point that I want to come to. At the end of the story where we ended, they took that young man who was just healed and they threw him out. Because him being in their presence was a threat to their certainties. We know what God is like. We know what the Messiah is going to do. We know what Sabbath is about. We know what a good Jew is. You don't fit. You are a threat. Get out. Which brings me to the point that I want to make today. We are living in a world of cancel culture, and it's getting worse and worse. And the reason I can tell you it's getting worse is because I've been a pastor in the denomination that I serve for 25 years, and there are things happening more and more within my own church that didn't used to happen. Or if they did happen, they were hush-hush and unofficial. Let me be specific. When you are in a church structure, you have people that preach and teach. And you try to be careful about who preaches and teaches because you don't want people preaching and teaching who are preaching nonsense. That's reasonable. I have people that I would never invite to speak in my local church. But at the same time, I'm very much in favor of the freedom of information. Even though I don't agree with you, and even though I don't support your message, I believe you have the right to teach and preach your message. I'm just now going to let you do it here. That viewpoint, I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, I'm just saying that's how it is. So that viewpoint has expanded to the place where now my church is creating lists of who can and who can't speak. Speakers that are not allowed, they speak in other parts of the world, but you're not allowed to come here. Because we've decided that in our cultural context, what you're saying is not acceptable, so you're not allowed. I'm uncomfortable with that. You say, well, how can you be uncomfortable with that when you just said there's people that you would allow and wouldn't allow to speak in your local church? It's messy. I fully admit it's messy, and I admit that there's a tension there. So I've been wrestling with this, not for a day or a month or a year. And when I read the Gospels, I find the Jews very much about cancel culture, but I don't find Jesus being that way. So this is how I'm changing my own personal view, and this is where I hope my church is going to go as time unfolds. If I had a church member who came to me and said, Pastor, I would really like it if we could bring in so-and-so to speak. And if I know so-and-so, if I don't know so-and-so, I'm going to do some research. If I do know so-and-so and I'm not a fan, and by fan I mean they say things that I don't think are good, healthy, true, or right, I would sit the person down and say, these are my concerns. Do you still think that we should bring this person in? And if they said yes, I would say, okay, let's gather the rest of the church leaders, the elders and deacons, so on and so forth. Let's have a discussion. And if the whole church discusses it, the leadership, and they decide, yeah, we would like this guy to come, or this woman to come, I would be like, okay, it's my role as your pastor to protect the flock. I don't think that her message is healthy, but if you really want them to come, they will come under these parameters. That there will be time for questions, dialogue, and feedback, and if necessary, a time for me to present a different view so that everything's on the table. Because we live in a world where the left cancels the right and the right cancels the left and the right criticizes the left for having cancel culture and so on and so on. It's very hypocritical. And the truth is, how can any of us make an informed decision if we can try to control information and people aren't given the information? I would rather err, as I see how things are unfolding, I would rather err on the side of being too open than being too closed. Because I see in Scripture and in the life of Jesus a model where it's the enemies of Jesus who are trying to control information, to make the bubble small, to throw people out who have any kind of a view that might mess with things. Yet I find Jesus being open and crossing borders and crossing cultures and crossing the gender barrier and crossing the economic barrier. I find him talking to, reasoning with, helping, healing everyone. And how will we ever have a positive influence on our enemies if we just put up a fence and say, you stay over there, I'm going to stay over here? Because here's the thing. I don't have the same views that I've always had. Over time, my views on many things have been shifting, evolving. Some I've dropped, some I've added, some have just changed. How could any of that happen if I just barricaded myself in and said, no, this is the way it is. I am certain. Don't talk to me about anything else. And if I'm willing to change, it's possible that my enemy, if I was willing to listen and to dialogue, that they could change, that maybe they could bring me something that I was missing, and I could share with them something they were missing, and we'd both be better off at the end. That doesn't happen in cancel culture. It doesn't happen when we say, you stay there, I'll stay here, put up a wall. I just want to encourage you, like I've been doing all along. There is only one authentic Jesus. Just one. There are many views of him, but there's only one actual Jesus. He is found in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I invite you to read them and reread them and ask God to show you himself, and then have the courage to interact with and treat others as he did, and not to allow the prevailing culture of cancel culture to affect and infect the way you treat others. We'll see you next time.